Early in the morning on the 10th of January 1854, a group of labourers were walking through the picturesque county of Surrey when they noticed a pillow soaked in blood hanging from one of the cottage's windows. When their desperate knocking went unanswered, one of the men used a ladder to break in. Lying on the carpet with a slit throat was the middle-aged Mary Ann Brough, and by her side 2 children lay dead. As the men continued to search the cottage, they came across the corpses of 4 more young children, as well as the bloodied razor that had been used to sever each of their throats. Although a local surgeon pronounced the 6 children dead at the scene, Mary Ann had miraculously survived. The news spread like wildfire across the country, and by the time word of the scandal made it through the imposing gates of Buckingham Palace, a 34-year-old Queen Victoria scrawled in her diary, "A most awful and horrid tragedy has taken place at Esher. Mrs. Brough, for 8 months my son Bertie's wet nurse, has murdered her 6 children." Here is the story of the royal wet nurse Mary Ann Brough. And this is Crown Undone. Having lived in Surrey since she was born sometime in 1811, Mary Ann had spent her life in upper working class respectability. She kept house while her husband, George, worked as an underservant at the nearby Claremont estate, the home of the Queen's uncle, Prince Leopold, and where Victoria herself was a frequent visitor. It was likely during one of these visits that the Queen took notice of George's wife, Mary Ann, who had also been an employee at Claremont House before her marriage. When Victoria fell pregnant with her first son Bertie, the future Edward VII, in 1841, the search for a suitable royal wet nurse began. Despite going on to have 9 children altogether, Queen Victoria notoriously loathed being pregnant, and she once said that during pregnancy she felt more like a rabbit or a guinea pig than anything else, and it's not very nice. The Queen considered breastfeeding in particular to be especially repellent. In fact, when she found out that her own daughters had chosen to breastfeed their children, she wrote, "It makes my hair stand on end that my daughters have turned into cows." So, in a decision not unusual for upper-class women of the time, Victoria chose to outsource basically all aspects of child rearing, and the then pregnant Mary Ann was chosen to breastfeed the British heir. One contemporary newspaper, now held in the British Library archive, reported that several persons, many of whom were ladies of ample means, were desirous of having the honour of nursing the prince, but Her Majesty expressed a wish that the person discharging this office should come from the neighbourhood of Esher. A messenger was dispatched from Buckingham Palace early on Tuesday the 9th of November, and arrived at Claremont House before 10, with directions to Mrs. Brough to proceed to London by the next train. The Queen and Prince Albert both saw the child of Mrs. Brough and expressed their anxiety that it should be well taken care of. The expense of placing it with a wet nurse is liberally provided for by Her Majesty. Although Mary Ann originally moved into Buckingham Palace with her own baby to make sure her milk supply continued if Bertie's birth was delayed, once she began her royal wet nursing stint, her own baby was sent home, where the infant eventually died. After spending 8 months as the Prince of Wales's wet nurse, Mary Ann was dramatically dismissed, with most newspapers speculating that the Queen had discovered Mary Ann drunk in the royal nursery. Other reports asserted that Mary Ann's milk hadn't agreed with Bertie, but either way she was sacked and sent back home to her family in Surrey. By 1854, Mary Ann and George had 7 surviving children together, 6 of which still lived at home. As George continued his work as a house servant at Claremont, spending days at a time away from home, he started to suspect that Mary Ann is having an affair. George hired the private detective Henry Field to follow his wife during one of her regular trips to London, where Henry supposedly watched Mary Ann meet another man at a local tavern, and when George found out, he was furious. George confronted Mary Ann to tell her that he was leaving her, and that he'd be finding a solicitor to make sure that he got full custody of their children. Mary Ann was fully aware that in a court of law she was absolutely bound to lose the case. That night, on the 9th of January, completely consumed by the thought of losing her children, Mary Ann does the unthinkable. When she comes to, Mary Ann is surrounded by unknown faces. The gaping wound on her neck is being treated by a surgeon, and the workmen that found her are looking on, utterly shocked. One of Victorian Britain's most prominent psychologists, Forbes Winslow, published a graphic excerpt of Mary Ann's own confession in the Journal of Psychological Medicine. Once she was able to speak, still in the cottage where she killed her 6 children, Mary Ann admitted, "I went to Georgie and cut her throat first. I did not look at her. I then came to Carrie and I cut her. Then to Henry. He said, 'Don't, mother.' I said I must and did cut him. Then I went to Bill. He was fast asleep. I turned him over. He never woke. I served him the same. I then nearly tumbled into this room. The 2 children here, Harriet and George, were awake. They made no resistance at all. I then lay down and did myself." It was a shocking admission, and during her trial for the murders, the same Forbes Winslow gave evidence claiming that Mary Ann was acting under a spell of insanity. In fact, Winslow would publish several articles defending Mary Ann's defense of insanity, citing multiple testimonies from the trial which claimed that before the murders, Mary Ann was a completely faultless mother. One witness asserted, "I have frequently seen the prisoner with her children, and she always appeared to be good and kind to them." Another said, "I consider her as good a mother as ever lived. She kept her children well dressed and clean and acted in every way like a mother." According to Professor Andrew Mangum, this desire to frame Mary Ann as a frankly blameless participant in the deaths of her children was due to the very fine line in Victorian society between intense motherly care and murder, especially by necessity. Professor Mangum writes that the mid-19th century was not unfamiliar with the paradoxical idea of child murder as a form of parental obligation. In the period's journalism, the Victorians found themselves inundated with textual accounts of women killing their babies for necessity's sake. For many mothers, it seemed, murdering their children to save them from the hardships of slum living was an extreme act of nurture in itself. But Mary Ann lived quite comfortably. She was not a destitute woman wanting to put her children out of their misery. Even so, this paradox of deadly maternal love permeated the trial. In the end, Mary Ann was acquitted on the grounds of insanity, even though, according to John Charles Bucknell, another contemporary of the trial, Mary Ann had likely killed her children to prevent her husband from getting full custody, meaning by all appearances, a woman that had just slaughtered 6 young children was being acquitted. When Queen Victoria heard about the scandal, she was horrified, writing, "The news quite haunts one. She was, it seems, a depraved woman, morose, ill-tempered and stupid she always used to be when in our house." Mary Ann was sent to London's Specialist Psychiatric Hospital Bethlem, where she died 8 years later. That was the story of the royal wet nurse Mary Ann Brough. And this was Crown Undone.